Hello and a very warm welcome indeed to Quadriga, coming to you from the heart of the German capital, Berlin. Now, until recently, Germany had a reputation for being a country that welcomed refugees and asylum seekers with open arms. But with a hugely important national election coming up in September, the mood is changing. Of course, tens of thousands of people from places tormented by war and persecution, such as countries across Africa, as well as Syria and Afghanistan, are still risking their lives in desperate attempts to make their way to Europe. But after welcoming so many refugees into the country, Germany is now sending a growing number of them back to their countries of origin. So here today on Quadriga, the topic we're discussing is Getting Tough, Merkel's asylum U-turn, ? And to do so, I'm joined here in the studio by three seasoned observers and analysts. Let me introduce them to you, beginning with Alan Posener, who is a political commentator for the Berlin daily Die Welt. He argues that welcoming migrants while punishing Greeks and other southern Europeans has helped to deconstruct the European Union. Let's hope, he says, it's not too late to change course. Also with us is Malaiz Daud, a political analyst from Afghanistan, who says deporting Afghans may be ethically problematic because of the ongoing war in Afghanistan, but it's the only way for Angela Merkel to fend off the challenge from Germany's populist right. And a warm welcome too goes to Antje Bauer, a well-travelled journalist who focuses on the Middle East and Afghanistan. And Antje says by deporting people to the war zone that is Afghanistan, Germany is betraying its human rights principles. It's a fascinating and very important topic we've got to discuss today. Alan, I'd like to give you the first question. Critics of Angela Merkel are saying that Germany is becoming a country that once had a welcoming culture, but now has a culture of deportation. Do you agree?
No, not at all. I don't agree with the first part. Germany never had a welcoming culture. Our constitution, the Dublin laws of the European Union actually stipulate that we don't take any refugees, because if they come from third countries, which are deemed safe, as are all the countries around us where these refugees would have to pass through, we should send them back. That's in our constitution. Angela Merkel made an exception 2 years ago to this inhuman or inhumane rule, letting in hundreds of thousands because the whole system was blowing up in all of our faces. But Germany was unprepared for that. What we're now doing is gearing up to deal with the fact that of the hundreds of thousands who we let in, at least 50%, if not more, have no right to be here. And so we have to, send them back to make room for those who do have a legitimate reason to be here. So this whole idea of we were once such a welcoming country and now we're doing a U-turn is totally wrong. We were never a welcoming country. There was a short burst of so-called welcome culture in 2015, and now we're getting back to more or less normal.
Antje Bauer, what do you say?
I agree partially.
Oh, good.
there was a big burst. And the question was what happened afterwards, because I think there was a sort of U-turn, because there was a U-turn in the politics of Angela Merkel, because she said, OK, we can do it. And then she saw that it's more difficult, actually, than she imagined, also because she didn't consult it with the European partners and we were the only one to take, or more or less. But I think the question about about the welcoming culture is not only talking about politics, it's also talking about society. And I don't see that really the German society, which has broadly welcomed the refugees, has completely changed. I don't see that. I see in the media we are talking a lot about the far right who are against the migrants or the refugees, but I think there's still a lot of initiatives who are trying to help the refugees to feel better, to integrate, to learn German. And this is part of the welcoming culture. The other is more welcoming politics for me.
Malaiz Daud.
I think you have to look at the structure of the society too. Sociologically speaking, Germany is a country that is, from the religious point of view and also from the cultural point of view, the unit of cooperation in the society is not only family, it's the whole society. Even helping the Southern Europeans was, it was because Merkel felt, not only Merkel, but Germany generally felt that they had to help their fellow human beings. When it comes to the welcoming culture of Germany, I always criticized the non-Germans who've lived here for a long time, and some of them who've also come new. They lack the initiative, to be honest. I see a lot of my German friends who've taken a lot of initiatives. They volunteer to work with the newly arrived refugees. But the non-Germans, a lot of the Turkish Arabs, and also, so we have the biggest Afghan community in Europe, in Germany. Literally, they only criticize the system. They only criticize the new people who've come in. They criticize the intervention of the international community in my country. But what have you done for the refugees? It's a huge question.
It's interesting that you're talking about your own home country, Afghanistan. One reason why the story we're talking about today is so much in the headlines is because there have been deportations of people from Afghanistan back to your country of origin, back to their country of origin, which is a war zone. Why are they being deported to a war zone?
I think you have to disaggregate the whole situation there. It is a war zone. I mean, if you look at it from the academic point of view, like Uppsala University says that if there are 1,000 battle-related deaths in a country, then it's a war, it's a civil war. Whereas our president, he described it as a regional war and a global war on terrorism there. So there is war. There are pockets like in Kunduz, if people come from Kunduz, I understand they have a legitimate reason. If people come from Helmand, I understand they have a legitimate reason. But there's so many places in that country that also enjoy a lot of perks of the international intervention. At the same time, the state has done really well to provide for them. So it depends who you're sending back. At the same time, it's so difficult to see who has a legitimate claim to stay here and who doesn't have it. A lot of Afghans have also come from countries like Pakistan, especially Iran, who they lived there for 40 years. They faced a lot of discrimination, horrible, horrible situation that they faced there. They've come here too. So it's a very complex phenomenon for now.
Well, I think it's to get a little bit of background to what we're talking about here, we need to talk about the Alternative for Germany party here, which could emerge. It's an anti-Islam, anti-immigrant party that could become the third political force in German politics at the September elections. Angela Merkel has reacted with a hard line on deportation and refugee policies in general. Let's just get that background before we continue the discussion.
In late summer 2015, Germany opened its heart and its borders. Chancellor Angela Merkel was touched by the suffering of refugees, and she allowed hundreds of thousands of them to enter the country. But now things have changed. The open-door policy has been revised. Last year, 80,000 people whose applications for asylum had been turned down were sent back home. That's a record number. The federal and state governments recently adopted measures aimed at speeding up deportations. There's even a controversial plan to house failed asylum seekers in special facilities near airports so they can't escape. And the authorities may be allowed to search refugees' smartphones to confirm their identities. Will Angela Merkel now become known as the Deportation Chancellor?
Will Angela Merkel, Alan Posener, be known as the Deportation Chancellor? Is she, with the election coming up in September, is she pandering to the far right, to the populist right here in Germany? A lot of people say that's what's happening.
Look, it's not pandering to the populist right if you take laws seriously. German law says that, an international law, by the way, which applies here, the Geneva Convention on Refugees, say that you have a right to be considered a refugee if you have been persecuted for political, religious or other reasons. Not just anyone who comes here because in their country there's a war on or because they're economically in dire straits. So we go to great lengths in Germany to find out. It takes a long time and individually process. That's why it takes so long to find out who has a legitimate right to stay and who doesn't. And it's about, I mean, with people from the Western Balkans, for instance, Serbia, Kosovo, Albania, who are the second biggest group, 98% have their applications turned down. So it's simply implementing the law to send them back. And you can go through country by country, whereas, for instance, among Syrian refugees, I think something like 96% are accepted and can settle here and have their applications accepted. So enforcing the law isn't becoming a deportation chancellor. It's finally doing what should have been done, actually, 2 years ago.
But the question of the law is very much up to interpretation. So I agree that what Angela Merkel did in 2015, that was against frontier laws which were unjust, as you said yourself. I never understood why Greece and Italy agreed to that, that they would accept all those who come, because Germany is so much in the middle of everything. There's no way to come if you don't come by plane, and that's already difficult enough. So the question is what is really the criteria which you apply? So you say, okay, they adopt the criteria for Syrians to stay here because there's a war. Isn't there a war in Afghanistan? That's a question. I think there's no war in Serbia, that's clear. So I think it's clear they have to be brought back because we cannot take everybody who wants just to come here. But if we ask the Eastern European refugees to go back, that's one thing. For me, to deport Afghans to Afghanistan is another thing. You say, okay, they are safe places. I doubt that those who go back, and there have been people, for example, who have been brought back who are part of a religious minority, I doubt that they have a possibility to develop themselves. And I think we should at least accept all those who come really from countries like Iraq, like Afghanistan, like Syria, like Eritrea, where you have no safety. And our German asylum laws say that. They don't ask for everybody that he has to show that he has been personally and individually pursued.
Alan.
Well, I think you're wrong. The Geneva Convention, which we have signed, actually states that as a refugee you have to prove that you've been persecuted for your political. Yeah, okay, and for instance, someone who comes from Morocco and says, I'm a homosexual and this society is not welcoming. The ruling of German courts is, no, society is not welcoming to homosexuals in Morocco, but if you don't flaunt it, you can live your life. If you're a closet homosexual, you can live your life, and they are sent back. I know this because a friend of mine, his boyfriend, was sent back. I think this is difficult, but given the fact that so many people are really in danger of life and limb, in Syria, for instance, and in parts of Iraq, this is what you have to do. And other circumstances, I might, say, well, this is really hard to send back someone to Morocco who's a homosexual who might get stoned if people found it out. But, there's only so many resources.
Malaiz.
Well, this is the idealist versus the realist discussion, very classic. The problem is with the situation in Afghanistan, we got close to 500,000 refugees back from Pakistan. They were forcibly removed from Pakistan. So the level of racism you see there and the kind of deportations that are taking place there, and then you compare it with Merkel, you can't really call her the deportations chancellor. It's unfair to her. At the same time, these refugees actually contributed to the Pakistani society. Of course, they don't have the kind of social system that exists in Germany that could have helped them. So for me, I never said there are safe places in Afghanistan. But if you take them, the units of comparison would be looking at the past of the country and then comparing the country with countries like Syria and Iraq and so on and so forth. And there, in the past, we've never had the kind of situation we have, the kind of open society that we have today, the progress that has been made today. And then comparative with Syria, we don't have that level of violence. We don't have that kind of brutality that is perpetrated both by the state and also there's a lot of non-state actors. And the state in Afghanistan is actively trying to address the issues of asylum seekers in Europe. At the same time, there's a national program they're working on for reintegrating the refugees that are also coming from the regional countries like Pakistan. So the state is actively trying to address the question. But it is challenging. You could be a potential target of an attack. You could lose your limbs. You could lose your life. It could happen. The likelihood is much higher than Germany. But again, it's a matter of priorities for states, like how many people can Germany take and how many people it can take from Syria or Afghanistan and so on and so forth. So you don't want to, and for politicians, it's a cold business. It's not only about principles, it's also about making sure that they stay in power if they're already in power or gain power. And if they see that, if the society does not agree with them, I've worked with politicians. it's going to be a different game plan.
Yeah, that's politics, I agree. The question is, how do you define a country is politics. Like the question, do you say that the homosexual from Morocco, is he really in danger or not? That's politics. It's a political decision. And I think, for example, in this I agree with Angela Merkel from 2015, that we can take in more and that we have to send back those who are very obviously have no reason to stay here, like Eastern European, like those from North Africa who have no individual reason. Then you
But even if she loses power, I mean, I would love for all the Afghans to stay here, but because that would be the capacity that would be developed here. After some years, they would go back, or at least they would develop those links, and my country would be helped with this. But is it politically possible for her that she would stay in power? I mean, the challenge is enormous for her. And
I think that's a question also of accompaniment by the civil society and by the media. I think, for example, that too much coverage has been given, media coverage has been given to the far right. When you have a demonstration of 20 people of the Alternative for Germany, you have a big thing in the newspapers. I think that's not necessary. I think what has been neglected since 2015 are all these initiatives which are still working with refugees and for refugees. So I think we get an image of a society which is not corresponding to the reality.
But does it translate into votes? Are we going to face the same kind of situation that we have in the US right now? Because everybody thought it was...
No, what I wanted to say, you create somehow reality. If you talk only about a certain thing, it looks bigger than it is.
Yeah, but we know that the far right, not only in Germany, but all across Europe, because they were the receiving end of a lot of criticism and a lot of bullying. Okay, anyhow, what they've really mastered is the narrative that resonates with the sentiments of people. So could we create another narrative, and do we have the structures in the society and politics to counter that narrative? And that's exactly what happened in the US. No one had that narrative. I mean, Bernie Sanders had it, but he was shot down by the very forces that are very progressive.
Malaiz, I'd like to go back to a point that you were talking about. You were talking about people who've applied, Afghan citizens who've applied for asylum here in Germany and have had their applications turned down, have been sent back to Afghanistan. I just want to look at a case in point, a young man called Kazim, before we talk about that just a little bit more.
Kazim has now returned to a country that he no longer considers home. He doesn't understand why he was not allowed to stay in Germany. He was working to build a new life there.
I was in Germany for 6 years in the state of Bavaria. I lived and worked in Augsburg, and I learned the German language. My life was secure there.
Kazim is staying with friends in the northern Afghan city of Mazar-e-Sharif. Taliban forces are active in the region. Last November, 4 civilians were killed in a truck bomb attack on the German consulate in Mazar. Kazim can't go back to his home village because it's controlled by the Taliban. Deportations to Afghanistan, are they a violation of human rights?
How much do you feel for Kazim?
A lot. It's sad. It's really sad. Not only because the country is unsafe, but also because he spent 6 years of his life here. I mean, he could have been potentially a great person, not only for Afghanistan, but also for Germany.
Yeah.
These young people, they have the capacity, they have the potential to be productive in the society. No doubt about it. But at the same time, again, politics is a cold business, you know. It's not all that rosy.
Alan, should Kazim be in Germany or in Afghanistan?
It's, you know, in an ideal world, I suppose he'd be here, but I don't, if that's where he wants to be. I don't see why someone should complain about having spent 6 years in Germany, learnt German, which is an asset in Afghanistan, learnt a trade, which is an asset for him. You know, I mean, goodness, refugees from Nazi Germany who then returned to Germany after the war, they didn't complain that they had spent 6 years somewhere else and had to learn English, whether they're in South Africa, Australia, United States, or wherever, or in France. It seems a bit strange that instead of saying, wow, I was a guest of Germany for 6 years, I was given a good education, I was able to educate myself, now I come back, instead of which he's complaining. He may have good reason, but, you know, there is this other side that he had, you know, had opportunities here.
Mm-hmm. Well, the difference is he goes back to a war zone. He doesn't come back to a Germany where there was no war again. And at the same time, these two countries are so different. That situation was very different from this situation. And the perspective...
If you come back to Germany in 45, everything's in ruins, you know, I mean, come on.
He didn't decide on his own.
Well, look, we don't know. We don't know about Kazim. He obviously doesn't want to be where he is. I can understand that, but on the other hand, it is the law.
The laws can be unjust.
Yeah.
The law.
The Taliban had a law. The Nazis had laws.
No, it's okay. It's a law of international law which 146 nations have put into place, the Geneva Convention.
Yeah, but this is not even binding. What is binding for us are the asylum laws, which are, interestingly, broader than the Geneva Convention.
And the states have the final say on every single case. I mean, again, it's not easy for Germany, we understand, but Germany will have a population deficit. These people could be extremely helpful in the future for this country. I know the Syrians who've come, they are the cream of the society. A lot of them are highly educated. They could contribute in many ways. And also these young Afghans could contribute in many ways to the German society. And especially if you waste somebody 6 years of his life, you say he's gained capacity, but at the same time, you say German language is maybe something that he can use in Afghanistan. You never know, you know. The economy has gone so bad after the 150,000 soldiers because it was created around the services provided to these soldiers who went out. So maybe he doesn't even have a decent source of income. So for him, it was a totally different story.
Alan, I'd like to begin to wrap it up by just getting to the core of the issue that we've been talking about today. Germany took in a lot of people, more than 1 million people, that's for sure. And it is now beginning the process of sending back people to their countries of origin, maybe hundreds of thousands of people. A quick answer from each of you, but I would really like to know, how does Germany avoid becoming a hard-hearted country in the midst of this process?
It avoids becoming a hard-hearted country by sticking to the letter of the law and sending back people who don't have the right to be here and welcoming those who do have the right. Now, the law is hard-hearted, if you will, but obeying the law, doing what the law suggests, is surely what a law-abiding, what the rule of law demands. So that's what it's about.
I think law is up to interpretation. I think hard-hearted would be to bring them all back, to have the strictest interpretation of the law. For me, the good solution would be that those who come from conflict countries have the right to stay here, crisis, war countries, and those who come for strictly economic reasons should be turned back if they cannot prove that they have individual reasons to stay.
Malaiz.
I think the best solution is take more time to study the phenomenon more in depth, to see its economic, political, cultural implications, because for now there's so much of confusion whether the refugees are going to be productive for the society or not, whether they are a potential threat or not. The problem is nobody knows concrete answers. There wouldn't be definitive answers, but no one knows concrete answers. And for that, we need to study the situation better. So take more time.
And is Angela Merkel going to go down in history as the Chancellor of Deportation or the welcoming Chancellor?
Depends from what perspective you look at it. As I said, Pakistan, if you compare it with Pakistan, of course not. But if you compare it with her own welcoming way in 2015 now, you know, people like Kazim would have a different opinion. I would have a different opinion, of course.
Mm-hmm. Same question. Chancellor of Deportation, the hard-hearted Chancellor, or the welcoming Chancellor?
No, I think what differentiates her from her colleagues in Europe, for example, on the Western Journal, is that she had opened once the frontier, and I think this is something which will remain in the minds.
Mm-hmm. The welcoming or the unwelcoming Angela Merkel?
The hard-hearted Chancellor, but to the wrong people. She's hard-hearted towards the Greeks, towards the Southern Europeans, all this austerity and so on. Mm-hmm. So, and as far as refugees are concerned, she'll go down in history as the Chancellor who, as in so many things, changed her course so many times that no one really knew what her heart was all about, quite frankly.
Mm-hmm. And one final question, I'm interested, I'd just like to talk about Donald Trump, because the Europeans, get him in here, the Europeans tend to be so sort of high-minded when pointing to America and saying Trump's policies are so illiberal, building walls, building fences, ejecting immigrants from the country. Is Europe not doing exactly the same thing by building walls and fences?
To be honest, Donald Trump, in Europe, it could be a different person, but like I would quote Barnett Rubin, who's an Afghan expert. He said that he could be a blessing in disguise for Afghanistan because he may have better relations with Russia, and Russia could be a potential spoiler in Afghanistan. So he could actually make sure that Russia doesn't become a potential spoiler, and we'll also not have the refugee problem.
OK, we're going to leave it there on that note. Thanks very much for joining us. I hope we've given you plenty of food for thought, and if you've enjoyed the programme as much as I have, do come back to Quadriga next week. Until then, bye-bye. Cheers.